Hey everyone, it's Myriam and welcome back to my channel. So this week's video is going to be a sort of Inktober 101 breakdown video of sorts. As some of you may already know, I've attempted Inktober about 4 times in the past and I finally managed to complete it last year and it went really well. But I learned tons from both not finishing it and from completing it. So I thought I'd put a little video together with all the information I gleaned from trying it out myself. And also some basic Inktober information for anyone out there who's wanting to know more about the challenge. So I'll be including in this video some advice about basic supplies such as pens and papers, but I'll also be talking a little bit about some tips and some pieces of advice, which I'm hoping might be helpful to those of you who are either trying Inktober out for the first time or coming back to it in the hopes of completing it this time. Before I jump into the topic of this video, however, I do have 2 quick announcements to make. The first one is that I have a clearance sale going on in my shop right now. It ends on the 7th of October. It is 25% off with the code LAST18. All items marked as last chance on my shop will be retired permanently after the sale is over, so now is your last opportunity to grab any prints or originals that I will be then taking off the shelves. My patrons get 30% off with a special code, so if you're interested in checking any of this out, you can go to my shop or my Patreon. The links are in the description below. And talking of Patreon, I have written a free and public post, so it's accessible to everyone, even if you're not a patron of mine, for free. And it's basically a written summary of this video with a little extra info like what I'm doing for Inktober and that kind of thing. And it also includes a downloadable PDF compilation of a bunch of prompts that other artists have come up with for Inktober. So if you're wanting a little extra inspiration, I'd recommend heading over there and checking those out. So now let's talk about what Inktober actually is. Some of you are probably familiar with the idea of it, but I just thought I'd do a quick little rundown of the actual event. So Inktober is a yearly challenge that happens during October in which you draw a drawing in ink every single day. It was created by Jake Parker, and Jake is a cartoonist and illustrator, and I think he initially created the challenge for himself to help him improve his inking and his line work. The link to the official Inktober website and to Jake Parker's website will all be in the description below if you want to read more about this. Since Jake released this challenge, it has become this enormous event in the art community with artists all over the world on all different levels participating and sharing their work online. It's just this really great exercise for self-improvement, discipline, and just meeting other like-minded artists. Jake releases a new prompt list for Inktober every single year. Following the prompt list, however, is not a compulsory requirement. The only rules for the challenge are to create a drawing in ink every single day and post it online with the hashtag Inktober and Inktober 2018 this year, but whatever year you're doing it at. So now let's talk a little bit about supplies and materials. It's my understanding that Jake created this challenge with traditional art in mind. So if you want to keep it OG and kind of follow in Jake's footsteps, then you can use any number of the following traditional inking supplies. You could decide to use fine liners or multi-liners. These are the tools I used for my own Inktober last year, and it was really fun. These liners come in a variety of sizes and line thicknesses, and they're really great if you want a lot of detail in your work, if you want to practice cross-hatching, or if you are interested in creating a lot of textures. The ones you see on the screen right now are not an exhaustive list of all the ones out there. These are just the brands that I own and that I've tried and liked. You could also decide to go for brush pens. In my opinion, these can be a little bit trickier to get used to, but if used properly, you can end up with the most beautiful flowing lines and just really dynamic looking drawings. Again, not a complete list of all the brands out there. These are the ones I like and own, but there are tons more out there that are just as good. You could also decide to use traditional dip pens and nibs. Again, I think these could be slightly trickier to use, but they can result in just the most gorgeous artwork. And then you could decide to go for just some simple brushes and inks. I have a range of really cheap brushes that I use for inking, but you could also decide to go for full-on calligraphy brushes if that's what you like using. And something else you could use along the brush idea are water brushes. I see a lot of people fill the container of their water brushes with liquid ink and use them that way. And obviously you'll probably need some liquid inks, especially if you decide to go for the dip pen or brushes route. And there's tons out there. There are really great brands out there. You could decide to just go for the simple, classic black Indio ink, or there's tons of other brands out there like Sennelier or Winsor & Newton or Liquitex that do really, really great inks. Now, I get that a list like this can seem a little bit daunting, especially if you're starting out doing Inktober for the first time, trying out inking for the first time. You might not have those supplies at home, you might not be able to afford them, you might not know where to start. So don't worry about it, just use supplies you have at home that you're familiar with. You could go for a ballpoint pen, you could decide to go for just gel pens, you could decide to go for fountain pens. These are probably really great to ink with, really cheap. You could decide to go for regular Sharpies. For all I know, you could even decide to draw on a whiteboard if that's what you want to try. Remember, art is not about the tools you use, it's all about you. You are the one that will bring out the potential in any kind of supplies that you decide to use. It doesn't invalidate your work if what you use is cheap and readily available. You can decide to stick to black and white, the OG route again, or you could decide to add a little bit of colour if that's more your thing. There's tons of really good coloured inks out there. You could go for Copic markers, you could simply go for felt tip pens. Why not use highlighters? I mean, there's tons of options out there to still use ink, but add a little bit of this touch of colour. Now, as far as paper goes, I'm no inking expert, but from my experience, I think that paper that's smooth without any texture or very slight texture works the best, especially if you want to use pens to ink. Smooth paper just makes it easier for the pen nib to glide on, and it will be much easier for you to achieve those clean, beautiful lines. So things like art cartridge paper or sketching paper or marker paper maybe can work really well with things like fine liners and brush pens. Now, if you're intending on doing more wash-heavy artwork using layers of ink, for example, or a water brush, or stuff that has more water in it, you might want to go for slightly thicker paper, ideally watercolor paper if you can. There is smooth watercolor paper, it's called hot press watercolor paper. You might want to stay away from what's called cold press watercolor paper or rough watercolor paper. These are papers with quite a strong tooth, a strong texture, and that just means that you get these uncontrollably wobbly lines. For washes, try and go for paper that is thicker than 160 GSM. Ideally, thicker than 300 GSM is great, but that's a bit more expensive. And alternatively, you could also use mixed media paper as long as it's thick enough to withstand washes also. Now, to spice things up a little bit, if you're not keen on using just white paper, you could go for tan or coloured paper. The advantage of those over white paper, especially if you're using black ink, is that you can add some highlights with some white gel pens or some white inks, and you're basically getting a three-tone drawing. Now, there are 3 questions I see a lot asked during Inktober, and I thought I'd address them now. And the first question I see is, can I use pencil before inking? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. This is not a challenge where you try not to erase. This is an inking challenge. This is to learn how to ink drawings. So remember, Jake is a cartoonist and illustrator, and in that industry, you don't really necessarily always go in straight with ink. You have a sketch first, and then on top of that, to clean it up, you ink it. So you can absolutely use a pencil if that's your process. Just go for it. Do whatever you can. The important thing is that you create a drawing in ink every day. The second is, can I use watercolors or paints? And again, the answer here, I would say, is yes, of course. Now, if what you want to be doing is participating in Inktober, do remember that it is an inking challenge. So if you're going to add some colour with some watercolours or some paints, make sure that there is an inking element in your piece, such as, you know, doing your inking first and then adding some colour with watercolour on top, or vice versa, doing your watercolour fill-in and then using your ink pen on top of that. And then finally, probably one of the most controversial questions that has been asked in the past is, can I participate but do art digitally? And although Jake has put the emphasis on traditional art in his challenge because that's the set of skill that he wanted to practice himself, and inking digitally does take up a slightly different set of skills, Jake has come out this year saying that yes, it's absolutely okay to participate doing digital art if it's a skill that you want to practice more, and if that's your process, then just go ahead and you can absolutely participate. Now let's jump into some advice and some tips on how you can go by giving yourself the best chances to complete the challenge, or at least to reap as many benefits as you can from it. Now, Something I do want to say, however, is that Inktober has grown so massively popular that it can be easy to lose sight of what the challenge was at its core initially about. It's easy to think of it as this general kind of competition thing that everyone takes part in, where you have to create these beautiful pieces of art, where you don't really amount to anything if you don't finish it, that kind of thing. But at its core, the event is about improvement, it's about practice, it's about self-discipline, it's about creating a solid foundation for yourself as an artist. It's a personal challenge, it's something that you need to use to get to learn more about yourself as an artist and about your art process. So without further ado, here are a few tips to help you finish, or at least to help you get as much as you can out of it. The first tip concerns inspiration. This is one of the main obstacles that people run into during Inktober, and to remedy to that, there are a few different options. The first one is using a prompt list, and Jake releases his own official Inktober prompt list every year, and he has a word for every single day. They're quite broad words, they're very open to interpretation, and they're kind of meant as a basis and as a ramp to kickstart your imagination and get you going every day. However, do remember that using his official list is not compulsory to participate in Inktober, so if his doesn't inspire you, or if you need a little extra, then there's tons of other artists who post their own, create their own themes and their own prompt list every year and post them online and invite other people to join if they want to. So if you want to check some of those out, you can go on Instagram, or you can download the PDF I've got available on Patreon for free, where I've compiled, I think there's about 10 or maybe 20 in the PDF. You can just browse them, you can combine different prompt lists, you can inspire yourself and create your own. It's just completely up to you what gets your imagination firing. But if you feel like prompt lists tend to stress you out or hinder your imagination more than anything, if you're anything like me and you just don't really work well with prompt lists, then why not just pick a theme? Pick something that you know will inspire you for the whole month, something that you look forward to creating. If you always had an idea for a kind of series that you wanted to do, or if you wanted to draw a different element every day of your favorite film, for example, just go for a theme that you know fires up your neurons and gets you excited to create. That way you have a little bit more flexibility every day to create what you feel like creating, but you still have a unifying theme around your month. That means that you don't have as many options to think about when you're trying to come up with ideas. As some of you may know, I chose mental illness for my own Inktober last year, and part of the reason why I chose that theme is because it was broad enough to accommodate pretty much all the ideas I had. It was an underlying theme in my work anyway, so it just felt fitting to try and use that to create a unifying theme for my month. But it just gave me a thread to follow, but didn't restrict my concept too much that I felt stifled. So it was just enough leeway for me to feel flexible, but still enough of a theme that I could use it to come up with inspiration. Now, my second tip in this list is to keep it simple and limit your supplies. A good tip for any kind of long-term sustained exercise is to reduce your choices to the bare minimum and stick to it. If you're the kind of person who gets bored easily and you think you'll just be over it after a week if you have to use the same supply every day, try and stick to it, because this is the kind of challenge where you're trying to learn something. So if you keep jumping from one thing to the other every day, you not only will you put unnecessary stress on your mind because it will have to come up with what it needs to use every single day on top of having to find inspiration, but you also won't really get a good handle on whatever you're using because you won't be using it for a month straight. So I would strongly recommend picking your supplies wisely and then just sticking to those basic ones for the month. Something that might also help, especially if you're worried that you might not have the time to do a drawing every day, or also if you're worried that you need to create a beautiful drawing every day, is to put those supplies, if you can, in a pouch and carry it around with you. It will help with the first problem because you won't have to worry about not being in the right context, not being at home, not having your supplies on hand. You won't worry about when you can draw, and it'll help you just look out for a moment in your day where you can fit in that one drawing that you need to do on the go. And having to do a drawing on the go means that you don't have as much time to think about it. You don't have as much time to discard ideas because they don't feel worthy enough, because you need to get that drawing done now and you won't have another opportunity during the day. So it just means that it lifts a little bit of that pressure of getting your drawing perfect, and it lifts a little bit of that second guessing, because you just don't have the time to second guess yourself if you want to get it done. And then another piece of advice would be regarding sketchbooks. I know it's tempting for this kind of event where you kind of want to end up with this beautiful piece of work at the end, to go for a beautiful sketchbook, to create this kind of completed project with beautiful illustration and a beautiful book by the end. But try to be self-aware. Will this hinder you or not? Will it put more pressure on you or not? It might be that having a perfect sketchbook to drawing will put so much pressure on you to create something beautiful that you'll end up being more stressed than anything. So if that is your case, I'd recommend just choosing a sketchbook that you are less precious about. Not necessarily a sketchbook that you don't like drawing in at all, because again, you'll have to be stuck with it for a month, but just choosing a sketchbook that you like the paper of, maybe, that is enjoyable to work in, but that you're not super worried about. Just use something that you feel okay being loose in, experimenting in, and something that doesn't feel like it will be the end of the world if it doesn't work out. My third tip is probably the most important one, and that's plan ahead. That includes trying out your supplies beforehand, giving them a go and finding a feel for what you think will work best for you. But then once you've figured out your supplies, a good thing to do is to start planning what you're going to be drawing. So personally, for example, I write down ideas. I have a notebook and I write down all the ideas that come to my mind that relate to my theme. I'd say you don't necessarily have to plan for the entire month, because that can be another stress. You get to the beginning of the challenge and you still haven't planned out all your days. But a good rule of thumb is probably to try and figure out at least a week's worth of concepts. That way you can start the challenge without having the worry of finding inspiration. And then once you actually start drawing on those concepts that you've already planned, your brain will probably start coming up with more ideas for the rest of the month. Another thing that you can do, either in conjunction with having a list or instead of having a list, if you're the kind of person who kind of comes up with ideas if you're actually creating instead of just writing them down, is to do thumbnails. So if you're the kind of person who iterates concepts by doing quick sketches and seeing where it leads you, just start doing small drawings of various ideas that you have, and your brain will build on top of that and come up with more and more concepts. Or if you already have ideas and all you need to do is the last step of knowing how it's going to look, you can create thumbnails to get a better idea of the final piece, so that when the day comes, you don't have to experiment as much and you can go straight into the final piece. And then finally, the last tip I would give you is to treat the whole thing like a marathon. And I mean that in two ways. Firstly, treat Inktober as a yearly event as a marathon. Don't expect yourself to complete it the first year. Don't beat yourself up for not finishing it the first year. You can definitely attempt it. It's all about giving it your best. But if you don't, be aware that it was your first time trying it. It's absolutely fine if you encountered problems that you weren't expecting. This is a challenge about getting to learn yourself as an artist and improving on what you are as an artist. So it will take a few tries to actually work out the kinks and figure out how to be most effective and productive. Do your best and then challenge yourself to do even better the next year. If you keep trying, you will manage to complete it, because you will learn every year what you've been doing right and what you've been doing wrong, and then at some point you will find that right solution, that right mix of everything that means that you manage to go the distance. And then the second way I mean it is for the month itself. Don't go full hog on the first week. Don't immediately try, especially if you're new at this, don't immediately try to create amazing pieces of art every day of the first week and then run out of ideas by the end, or run out of energy and steam and just end up being fed up after 1 or 2 weeks. A lot of people don't manage to get past the 15-day mark, which was my case for the first 3 years I tried it, and that was because For one, I didn't prepare correctly, and secondly, there were a lot of obstacles I ran into that I wasn't aware I would run into, like time management, technical skill, inspiration, energy, that kind of thing. And I tried to learn from that and then do better the next year. But during the month, I would give it my all too early. I would do all the ideas I loved in the first week, and then it was just left with a bare wasteland of ideas for the rest of the month. And so I just got to the end of the month and was just like, I have no ideas I'm looking forward to creating, and I would just create slightly subpar work that I wasn't very happy with. And as a result, I just didn't enjoy it and would just give up on it quite easily. So my recommendation would be to try and plan ahead and keep a few nugget ideas for the end of the month. That way you look forward to creating those. Think of them as kind of milestone rewards. So create a piece that you really love, a concept that you're really excited with at the end of each milestone. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Create something special maybe for the very last week to celebrate the fact that you got there. Just make sure that you pace things that you like throughout the month. Make sure you keep looking forward to things. Remember, this challenge is about you. It's not about what the world thinks of you. So if your best this year is to do 1 drawing a week, do 1 drawing a week. If it's to just do 2 weeks of it, do 2 weeks of it. If you know you won't be able to do the rest of the month, that's fine. It doesn't mean that you don't have to participate. It doesn't mean that you've automatically failed. It doesn't mean that you've failed at all. You're just doing your best this time. And then maybe try and do better next year. Set your own limits, set your own challenge in a way that's going to benefit you, in a way that's not going to make you fed up of creating, that's not going to hinder you from wanting to do more work afterwards. This is about getting to know who you are and how you work, and working out the kinks to make you more effective and productive. You are just as valid as an artist participating in Inktober if you decide to only do 2 days every week, or if you decide to do the 31 days. It's all up to what is a challenge for you at this point in time. And then I have a note on the concept of cheating. I really detest the idea that you could cheat at Inktober. I get that question a lot. I got it last year. I think I was doing a pencil on one of my sketches and someone told me, oh, you're cheating, you're not supposed to do that for Inktober. Inktober isn't a competition or an exam. It's not like you suddenly do something that other people aren't doing and it invalidates all the work you've done for the month. No. It's a self-improvement challenge, and you might maybe kind of bend the rules of what Inktober is, but the only way you could actually be cheating is if you're cheating yourself. This is a challenge about you as an artist. This is not a challenge that other people are then judging the results of at the end and regarding whether you've actually fulfilled the rules to be able to qualify as an artist. This is a challenge about making yourself better. So the only way you could be cheating at Inktober is if, for example, you did 31 drawings during the year and then pretended you did all 31s during the month. And even then, you would really only be cheating yourself because you wouldn't have taken advantage of the benefits of drawing every day for a month. So, yeah, that's my stance on cheating. You can agree, you can disagree, but I just thought I'd share my thoughts about it. And then finally, I wanted to give you maybe a few ideas on things that you could decide to draw for Inktober, especially if you're not feeling up to the task of coming up with a new concept every day, and if you rather focus on stuff that you've been struggling with or stuff that you've been wanting to study for a little while. So if coming up with a new idea every day isn't really something that you see yourself doing right now, maybe try practicing your anatomy if that's something you've wanted to improve on. You could make yourself a theme per week. For example, you could start by drawing the skeleton the first week, then the muscles the second week, stationary poses the third week, and then dynamic poses the very last week. Or you could decide to do different parts of the body every week in different angles, or study a particular part of the body per week, for example the torso the first week, and study all those bones and all those muscles in depth, and then the legs the second week, and then by the end of the month you could attempt to recreate a full human, for example. You could decide to practice animals, you could decide to do mammals for the whole month, or just reptiles, or a type of animal per week, or if you're feeling up to that kind of thing, one animal for the whole month in different poses. Just draw cats. Just draw cats for the entire month. You'll become really good at cats. Maybe if faces are your problem or if heads are your problem, you could decide to draw a portrait every day. You could go from baby to old person throughout the whole month. You could decide to go just for women for a week and then just for men, or alternate every day, stuff like that. You could try doing a different expression every day. Or if clothing is something that you'd like to improve on, you could decide to draw a different outfit every day, maybe your own. You could take yourself as reference and draw what you're wearing every single day for the month. If landscapes are something that you've been trying to improve, then do a landscape every day. And actually, maybe what could be a good idea to keep you going throughout the month is to draw something that you encounter in your daily lives, something that you can draw inspiration from directly, something that you can reference directly. So you could very well build yourself a library of images for the whole month and then just draw one every day from reference, so that you don't have to come up with a concept. But you could also just decide to do the same thing with stuff that you encounter every day. So you could, like I said, either draw your outfit every day, draw what you had for lunch every day, draw the sky outside of your window, draw your pet in a different pose, draw a different classmate every single day, draw a car. There are tons of things in your everyday life that you could draw from life, and you'd be adding to the Inktober list of benefits drawing from life, which is just a really, really great thing to practice at any time. And then finally, maybe you just don't feel like using ink. Maybe you kind of feel like using paints, or maybe you feel like drawing with a pencil. You're not stuck with Inktober in October. If you still want to be participating in a 31-day challenge, if you still want to be drawing every day, if you still want to be part of the synergy of that kind of event, then there's Drawtober or Drawloween going on. Drawtober is focused on, well, drawing, so it's not ink, it's just drawing a new piece every day, and Drawloween is more centered around Halloween. I don't think there's any restrictions as to what kind of supplies you can use or what kind of look you can go for. It just usually means that the prompts are kind of Halloween themed with monsters and creatures and that kind of thing. But they're all going on doing Inktober, and so if you don't feel like joining Inktober, there are still other options for you to participate in. I do have the official Drawtober prompt list in the PDF that you can download on my Patreon. And then finally, here are my closing words. You know I like to ramble and give kind of a small pep talk in those kinds of videos. So this video won't be exempt. You can skip me if you don't want to hear me rambling. But basically what I wanted to say is that it's easy to just watch everyone else doing these incredible pieces of work, complete these incredible booklets by the end, sell prints, sell originals, just be really successful in Inktober. And it's easy to just look at them and think, why can't I do that? Why am I not capable of putting this together? Am I failed as an artist? Did I not succeed in this? Will I ever get to that point? And all I want to say is that remember that everyone's context is very, very different. Remember that it's a difficult challenge to fit in. Life will come in the way. And I know that well. The first 3 years I attempted Inktober, life came in the way. I got a job, or I got ill, or family visited, or I had to go away, or I had problems with my flat. I had stuff that became so overwhelmingly stressful that I couldn't focus on drawing. And last year when I finally managed to complete it, the only reason I managed to do so was because I was able to focus on just doing that for the entire month. I had no other commitments. I had no other job. This was my job. It was a goal in itself. And because I needed to make something from it, then it happened. I just dedicated my entire time and energy to doing it. It was exhausting. It was so intense, and I was so tired by the end. And I had to jump straight into a really intense job, and it was draining. It was very, very draining. It really brought home to me just how difficult it can be for most people to participate in that challenge. And granted, I did go full hog on my illustrations. I did complete proper full page illustrations that took me a few hours a day to create. But even if you are trying to fit in a small drawing every day, it's just notoriously difficult to draw every day. So many things can come in the way. Life is so different for everyone. Some people might have a family, some people might have a full-time job, some people may have school, you may have an illness, you might be someone's carer. There's just so many different things that take over, that just take priority, because technically, if you really look at it, it's not important, Inktober. on the grand scheme of things in life, it's not something that's going to take priority unless you really have the ability to do so, and that's just not something that's at the top of the list. So if ever you feel worried about the fact that you've not managed to finish it, maybe for a few years in a row or maybe for the first time, if you're ever worried that you are comparing yourself to others and you don't understand why you can't do what they're doing, look at yourself, look at your context, try to be forgiving of what's going on in your life. And as long as you try and do your best in what you are doing, that's all anyone can ask of you, including yourself. So don't ever feel like you are inadequate. Don't ever feel like you're comparing yourself to others and they all seem to be doing so much better, even though their life seems to also be difficult. You don't know what the everyday of everyone else looks like. Most people who manage to do what I did last year with Resign and Prince and all those kinds of events are probably doing it as a job. It's a very big incentive in here. To have a job just means that you have the time and motivation to spend on doing this event full on. And so just, I know it's a very regurgitated advice, but just don't compare yourself, because your context is going to be very different from someone else's. You will come to a point where you understand how to go by it and fit it around your life. But if this year's not the year, then that's fine. You didn't do any worse than anyone else in their own context. And finally, to summarize everything, I just wanted to say Inktober is well worth the effort. I would strongly recommend doing it if you feel like you are up for it, if you are considering doing it. Don't be put off by what everyone else is posting. Don't be put off by the feeling that you might not be good enough. This is again a challenge for self-improvement, for self-betterment, for self-discipline. You will learn tons, even if you just do a week, even if you just try it. You will learn more stuff about yourself every time you do it again. It's a great exercise to get better at discipline and organization. It's a really great exercise for time management, and it's a really great exercise for creative thinking. It will help build skills in your brain that allow you to extrapolate and find inspiration in more unusual ways than you were used to. It's a tough challenge, I won't lie. It's a difficult one, like I mentioned before, but if you're looking to go the extra step, and if you're looking to go a little bit further in your practice as an artist, if you're looking to get to know yourself better as an artist, then I would strongly recommend doing it. And at the end of the challenge, maybe write down everything that you've achieved. Maybe allow yourself to sit down and register and accept that you've achieved something, even if you didn't complete it. Acknowledge with honesty your failures and your victories, and you will have gained something from the challenge. And then my last note for this video before I leave you to it is to find your honesty. It sounds corny, but I strongly believe that's something that is just beneficial both in art in general and life in general, and can really be felt in a challenge like Inktober, where you are kind of incentivized to post your work online for other people to see and kind of judge. And so it's difficult to step away from the desire to create work that others will love. And it's difficult to kind of distantiate yourself from what people may like and what you want to create. So it's a really good exercise, because it's so public in a sense, to kind of force yourself to try and find exactly what you want to create. Because trust me, if you try and just create pieces that others will love, it will be a much more uncomfortable place and a much more difficult way to live with your art than it will if you just find what you really love creating. Because if you find what you really love creating, you will build yourself a niche that is comfortable for you, that you can thrive in, that you will feel inspired and motivated to build around. But if you keep creating work that you think others will love, if once they don't, it will crush you so much more, because it was everything that you wanted about this piece. You wanted people to love it. But if you already do, if it's something that you've created that you love, it will be difficult for others to take it away from you. It will be difficult for others to make you feel like you love your work any less if you already deeply do. And people will be drawn to you. As cynical as I can be, I do think that people genuinely are drawn towards honesty. They are drawn towards people who they feel are genuine, who they feel are offering themselves to the world in a very kind of open manner. And so I think that being honest and genuine in the work you produce is such a precious place to find in your art practice and in life in general, and I would strongly recommend that you try and find that while you do a challenge like this. And on these slightly philosophical words, I'm sorry if I went off a tangent there. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that it was vaguely useful in any kind of way. Do let me know in the comments if you're going to participate and what you're planning on doing, and I hope to see you next week. Take really good care of yourselves, have a really lovely evening, and I'll see you very soon. Bye everyone.